want to congratulate you on the Main Street Lender of the Year. Let me tell you a little bit about this. We've been doing this award for many years. Chris is one of our judges, and we were sitting down to talk about the Main Street Lender of the Year, which traditionally has gone to a lender, to a bank. And Chris said, hey, you know what? There's one person who's really been instrumental in PPP and working through that. So congratulations. That's why you were chosen. And
thank you. I'm honored by that. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
How important is government support of Main Street to support the American dream?
Well, I think it depends on how you term government support. Certainly PPP was extraordinary. You know, most Main Street businesses are not looking for government work or government money unless they're a contractor for the government. And then they just want to get paid on time. And so this was extraordinary, though. The way we have to frame it is this. You had local governments across this country, counties and cities, and in some cases states, that were basically telling a business owner, you can't open. Like, you can't serve customers, you can't bring people in, you simply can't operate. We are going to take from you the ability to conduct business and earn a living because of a public health emergency. And to me, that is the equivalent of a taking a private property right? So the government says we need to build a highway or we want to put a park or an airport, and they want your property, they can do it. They got to do it through eminent domain, and they got to pay you a fair market value. So if the government's taking your right, your property right, to earn a living and run your business, then the government has some obligation in those instances to allow you to survive. And that's really how we viewed Paycheck Protection as two things. We wanted to protect jobs. That's why it's called Paycheck Protection. We were going to have to send money to people either through the unemployment system or through their existing employment. And we thought that was the better way to do it, the existing employment. And then the other is, what are you going to do when you have massive Main Street failures? Not only is that devastating for the economy, but it's going to create all sorts of things people never thought about. You're going to have a real estate contagion, right? I mean, all of those malls and commercial centers would now have tenants that couldn't pay their rent, and then it was just going to spread throughout the system. So when you ask the question about how important it is for support, generally that support is they want government not to do bad things that hurt their ability to do what they do. But in a case as unusual as a pandemic, I think government support is essential to their survival if it's government that's inflicting the damage.
Hey, Marco, when did it personally hit you that, hey, this is serious, we got a problem?
We actually started working on it well, it really began initially as how can we use the existing lender programs in the SBA to help small businesses become part of our supply chain challenges. We're talking about supply chain in 2019, and pre-pandemic, we were already thinking about the challenges that we had there. And so really when this pandemic came and we saw what was coming, and we saw that we were headed towards a period of some disruption of business activity and even closures of an indeterminate period of time, we knew we had to act quickly. Now, we knew the airlines would get bailed out. We knew we have muscle memory in government of how to bail out big business. What government's never been able to do is provide assistance to smaller businesses, especially when it's government action that's harming them. And so we got to work. All we really did is repurpose that supply chain solution into something much bigger, obviously applying to this. And then the question is, how do you administer it? And we knew that there's no way that SBA could administer this, right? I mean, through their existing programs. We have firsthand experience with disaster loans in Florida, and it's just by the time, right now, we would probably start having loans being made right around this time, if you think about how crazy that would have been. So,
well, I didn't mean to cut you off. I sorry, Marco, but I'm just amazed at how quickly this went. By the time the concept came through, lenders were getting money out within 30 days. That's unheard of.
It is, but I mean, speed and time was of the essence. I mean, most small businesses do not have 3 months cash reserves. Most don't even have 3 days cash reserve in many cases. So we knew that was going to be a challenge, and we had to turn around, and it wasn't easy. Look, and any time you do that, something this big, that fast, there were some hiccups early on.
Of course.
A lot of credit goes to Treasury and Steve Mnuchin. They were directly involved in how this thing was drafted and written and implemented. Obviously, the SBA did the best they could. And then the lenders that stepped up. I would say without the regional lenders, the regional banks, and even some of the financial tech companies, fintechs, it would have been impossible for this program to reach everybody. As we saw some of the larger banks, they really didn't want to serve people outside of their existing commercial banking, maybe some business banking, but it became difficult for them for a lot of different reasons. And so had it not been for these regional banks stepping up and saving small business in America, they deserve a tremendous amount of credit in terms of being the implementer on the ground.
Senator Rubio, we're a constituent of yours, and we're the largest small business lending company here in the Southeast. And
I hear that a lot these days about a constituent of mine.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of smart people moving to our home state, right?
Yeah.
Well, the question I was going to ask you is, we were the sixth most active PPP lender last year, and it was a real honor for us to do it. But what do you think would have happened had the government not come out with PPP? Because my opinion is this was the thing that really helped stabilize the economy. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that.
I think, I'm speculating here, but I think we would have had not civil unrest. Substantial civil unrest in the country. I think it's hard to envision that, but I think that's what we would have faced. And I also think we would have had, catastrophic, permanent, almost irreversible damage to the architecture of our economy. Right. Imagine for a moment going to any strip mall in America today and imagine every one of those doors closed and what that would have looked like. And that's what we would have had. And it would have spread. It would have spread into the banking sector, right? You're a small business. You owe money. You can't pay it because you're out of business. You default. You have massive default that basically makes vulnerable now all the assets of all of our lending institutions, which would have had a paralyzing effect on lending writ large. It would have paralyzed our economy. I think we would have been scrambling to try to figure this out. And it would have been, not to mention a lot of people out there really struggling because our unemployment system couldn't handle the crush it was hit with. Imagine if everybody had hit it. And that's what would have happened.
Yep, I agree.
Senator, you said something very interesting, which was during the Great Recession, we knew how to bail out banks, Wall Street, the large corporate 500. This time around, we chose to bail out Main Street directly. How did that happen? Chris and I, and I believe you, we're all in the same boat on that. We're all supportive of that. How in the world did that change in the government and SBA?
Well, look, for a couple of things first, and I know you didn't mean it this way, but I don't consider this to be a bailout. A bailout is when you did something wrong, right. So we have to come and save you. These are small businesses that were told you can't work.
Right.
We government, local, state level, whatever it might be, we're not allowing you to open your doors. And so you're depriving them of the right to earn a living. You've got some obligation. And second, it didn't make a penny off of it. All that money had to go to rent or it had to go to pay salaries for their employees. So how it came about, as I said, is, we came up with this idea and there was a good group working on it. I think in the middle of a pandemic where everybody put politics aside, we worked on it. I'll never forget those meetings. They were long. They were socially distanced at the time. None of us we were here in Washington and none of us knew how much longer we were going to be able to gather here because if we had an outbreak in the Senate, given the age and demographics of the Senate, we felt like we were in a race against time. And so myself
and Zoom calls too. Yeah.
Sure. Well, myself and Senator Cardin and Senator Collins and Senator Shaheen spent a lot of hours with our staff working through the fine details of this. And initially there was some resistance early on by people in my party who to them, this is not natural that government would be giving money like this to business. But as we walked through it and explained, it became not just the most popular part of the COVID response, but the most effective in my mind.
Effective, absolutely.
And the evidence of that is, so it was 100. We kept our House colleagues in the loop, but they weren't even in session. But it was basically Senate-driven, bipartisan. Spent a lot of hours on it. I'm proud to say I came up with the name itself, PPP, and everybody jumped on that. And then the second phase of it was the implementation, where we had to be on the phone every day with Treasury, making sure this thing was being implemented. And if you look at my Twitter feed from that time, I was trying to pump out as much information as I could for guidance. And then we reauthorized it 2 other times, I believe. One of them I know for sure we reauthorized without even coming back to town. It was done by unanimous consent. So it sort of goes to show you this is, in my view, not just because I wrote it and had something to do with it, the most meaningful, impactful piece of legislation Congress has passed in probably 20 years in terms of the economy.
And the fastest too, and the largest actually as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and look, there are problems like anything else. We're now hearing every day about the U.S. Department of Justice going after people who cheated and lied, and I'm glad every time one of these people's prosecuted, I'm glad that it's happening. I would also say that despite all the things we put in place, it still had a lower fraud rate than some of these other existing legacy programs. But there's no doubt that there are people out there that took advantage of it, and if they get caught, they should be put in jail for doing it.
Yep.
Senator, I'm very fascinated about traditionally SBA has been used for first generation, second generation immigrants. When I talk to my peers, sort of give them a pep talk, how important is a banker's job in helping those people achieve the American dream?
Well, at the end of the day, if you have an idea about, I want to start a business, I have a great idea, but I need to turn it into reality and it requires money to do it. You either, unless someone in your family has it or you saved it up, which is difficult these days to do, you're going to have someone believe in the idea and be willing to lend you the money. And that's where banking becomes really critical in my mind, is that whether capital in general, you can't do it, right? You can't. I know someone who started up a Sub-Zero in these nitrogen ice cream places, a great family, immigrant family, but they needed someone to provide them the funding to be successful. That equipment and all that had to be bought and the franchise had to be invested in. And it's turned in great. They paid the money back and they're doing fantastic. So that's important, right? Obviously, so that's key. And then I think the second is some of the business, I think what people don't always fully appreciate is if you're doing community banking, and particularly the right way, you're not just providing people money, you're providing them resources on information. There are all kinds of things that come with owning a small business that sometimes the entrepreneur with a great idea doesn't know about: payroll, how to administer a payroll system. A lot of lenders, a lot of banking relationships now provide that as part of their system. How to quarterly tax payments also, and things of that nature. I've even seen lenders, help businesses with complying with local regulations, permits and the like, because ultimately if you've lent someone money, you want them to be successful enough to pay you back. And if they're not pulling the right permits, they're not gonna be able to pay you back. But so I think it's very valuable. And in a program like this, it's indispensable. I mean, there's just simply no way this could have been done had there not been a local interface from the lending community. And I think it was mutually beneficial because there's a lot of existing, I think community banks in many cases added a lot of new customers that couldn't be served by their bigger bank relationships. But I also think it saved customers that they had that wouldn't even be in business right now had it not been for this.
Senator, as a long-term SBA lender, I've been doing this over a couple decades, done a lot of work in Washington. I've always been impressed by the House and Senate small business committees. Tend to be some of the most bipartisan committees, I think, in Congress. I'm assuming partly based off the success of PPP. I would think that's going to continue. Would you not say?
Yeah, look, I think, and I say this with respect because I was the chairman of this committee, that it's a backwater committee that you don't hear a lot of talk about it. And it's not one of the most coveted appointments. Right. But I think when we took the control of it as the chairman, I wanted to maximize it because I thought there was a lot of space to operate. It's primarily basically seen as the committee that oversees the SBA, which is not one of our largest agencies, and so that's kind of, I think in this pandemic, it took on an outsized role. I think we learned a lot from it and are trying to build on it. So I think generally small business issues lend themselves to solutions that are not partisan in nature. That's not always, and you've seen some challenges this year with some of the appointees. There are people that refuse to answer questions or even respond to congressional inquiries, and we're going to have a problem with those nominees when they try to get promoted within the agency. But generally speaking, it's a committee that on most issues should be able to pursue their work in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way, and that certainly was my experience for much of my time as the chairman, working with Senator Cardin, who's now the chairman.
Right. Yep.
Very good. Hey, Chris, I know that you work closely with the senator. He's your home state senator. And did you think they were going to be able to pull it off?
Well, there was a lot of, I had some doubt, I'm not going to lie, but there was a lot of people, as the senator said, coming together, working ridiculous hours, trying to get the legislation to a level that was passable. And obviously it passed with massive support. And then the real work began, as far as I'm concerned, and the senator is saying, working with Treasury, working with the Federal Reserve to provide more liquidity, with SBA directly, the White House. There was a lot to do to get the program out there. And it was a little maddening, and I'm sure the senator would agree with me, but, we never experienced anything like this, or certainly hadn't experienced anything remotely close to this in our lifetimes. And so it was hectic and there's a lot of panic, but it was a real privilege for us in the private sector to be able to help out. And it was a real privilege to have you, Senator Rubio, here from Florida as the chairman of the Small Business Committee, really being the champion of this. So I just think it was a great, unique situation of all these folks coming together, all these different disparate interests, to really try to save America's small businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say, look, the bill itself was important, obviously, because it created the framework and the authorization, but it was in the rule, right, in the rulemaking. When Treasury sat down and wrote the rules, and they did that over a 72-hour period, and we had they gave us a lot of input on it. The rules is what really became valuable, and in particular, getting the input from the lenders as to clarifications on rules when the questions were released. Am I allowed to do this? Look, this was a new species. Right? No one had ever dealt with this. And basically, banks were fronting the money, right? You're a bank, you have cash, you were fronting the money on the guarantee that you're going to be able to turn around and sell it back to the federal government for a 1%, collection on it. And you were basically just a processor that was fronting the money. So when you go to a bank and ask them, hey, can you front this money the government's going to pay you, you better have some real confidence as to what's going to be forgiven, what's not going to be forgiven. And there was some confusion too, right? I mean, lenders are used to saying, okay, you want money, here's what the conditions you have to meet. There's no credit check or anything of that nature. And so we had to work through some of that as well, because the traditional, lending mechanisms were not set up for a program like this.
Right. No, not even, payroll documents. That's not something that normally goes into SBA lending, for instance. So there was a lot to learn on all sides, for sure.
Yeah, very good. Well, Senator, I know you're very busy. I want to thank you very much for taking some time to explain it. Great defense of PPP. I've heard, obviously, Chris and I and you have lived this for years, and that's the best defense I've heard in putting it into context and how to help the American economy. So I personally thank you, and I know a lot of people do. So I'm very proud to award you as the Main Street Lender of the Year. And thank you for your time. Chris, you have a final thought?
No, just thanks for joining us, Senator Rubio. It's a real privilege to have you on and for you to represent us. And I'll get you this award as soon as I see you next. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. I'm honored by it. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.